Greetings, explorers, and my brothers and sisters of Tartaria. Welcome to Quest for Tartaria. So, look at this, guys. I'm going to leave this in the description. The Great Wall of China. It's a book from 1909, and this author definitely is questioning the mainstream belief of the Great Wall of China. As you guys may have already kind of thought, is the Great Wall of China, it doesn't really match the Chinese culture very much. And well, now it does, because everybody's talking about it all the time. But you're looking at the style and everything. But me reading through this, there's a lot of anomalies in here. One of which is the different writings, I guess, they're finding in the Great Wall of China, showing that the Chinese aren't the original creators of the wall. And the Chinese are claiming they built this wall in 12 years. And it's ridiculously big. And, there's Chinese bodies in the wall and such. And they're like, well, that's proof right there that there's Chinese bodies in there, in the wall, And because the evil, cruel emperor just throwing the bodies in, because it only took 12 years to build, So when they die, they just throw them in, They got all these things. And then why are the defensive parts of the wall pointed towards China? That's one that I can find in small little areas, but nobody's addressing it. And they're just like, oh, don't look that direction. No. And then, they got catapults on the wall and things like that were capable of shooting 300-pound stones. And it's like, I don't remember hearing about that. And, and then in the meantime, they're like, oh, the Mongols are just running around in circles with their horses on the other side, kind of like South Park, and I'm just watching. Although they mentioned the Tartarians to the north had, 80,000 rhinoceroses. Wait a minute. Rhinoceroses. Well, and they were talking about their army, the infantry, the cavalry, and then apart from the horses, they were saying they had 80,000 rhinoceros cavalry soldiers. And it's like, interesting. So these guys are riding rhinoceroses into battle. That's pretty cool. And, here comes Genghis Khan and the Huns, and they're running around with their horses and their bows and arrows and their rhinoceroses. So, yeah, armor-plated rhinoceroses charging at you. So elephants are scary. Rhinoceroses, I'm sure, especially 80,000 of them, that'd be pretty scary. Yeah, it looks like Tartaria was a force to be reckoned with. It also says in here that the Chinese weren't the original. I guess I should say the wall was already there, or at least the towers for the wall were already there by the time the Chinese got to it. So the Chinese began building on what was already there, a pre-made structure. And also, like I said, they found other writing and different things showing that a different culture had it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of anomalies in here, guys. Like I said, I'll leave the description I'll leave the link in the description.
Chapter IV, The Only First. High pointed nose, slit eyes, pigeon breast, wolf voice, tiger heart, stingy, cringing, graceless, is the Chinese historian's description of the mighty man who conceived the idea of the Great Wall of China. In fact, however, he was one of the greatest hustlers the world has ever known, despite the very uncomplimentary remarks of the harsh historian. S.S. Ma Qian, 1 translated above literally from the Imperial History of China. 1 S.S. Ma Qian, called the father of history, was born in 145 BC to the Chinese mile, or li is roughly the third of an English mile. If taken literally, this would work out at 3,000 miles or thereabouts. Whereas the Great Wall is somewhat less. 10,000 inches is often used in a general sense for a large number. We look back over in the contemplation of Qin Shi Huang. It was a fine attempt of his to obliterate all previous records and start the world fresh. Qin had no Gatling guns, men of war, powder, or steam. 19. Money moves the gods. But for soaring ambition, never was there a head or heart on this planet, before or since, that was possessed of a greater amount than this same emperor, who lived 200 years before Christ, when Hamilcar and Hannibal went into Spain, and the Punic Wars broke out upon Europe. He has been called the Napoleon of China. But Bonaparte is not in the same class with this wicked, wonderful man. One of his first decrees, as recorded in history, ordained the abolition of the use of imperial posthumous titles, declaring it his pleasure that he should be known simply as Shi Huangti. The first emperor, and thus all successive generations should be distinguished numerically as the second generation, the third generation, and thus onward to the 10,000th. After having done a great many things, among which may be mentioned the subjugation of a score or so of smaller states, the unification of the empire, and the reported burial alive of his fond grandparents, because they had treated him badly, he began to cast about for the means to accomplish the ends of his itching, restless, mounting ambition. When the performances mentioned above, in addition to a great many others, were finished, Qin had been on the throne about 25 years, when he was now sole proprietor of a territory which the Chinese historian says extended from near the equator to Korea on the south and north, and from the eastern sea to Shenxi and Sichuan, one as king of Qin, but not as ruler of a united China. He only assumed the imperial title in 221 BC, after which he reigned 12 years, one that is from the state of Qin. An eminent scholar subjoins, "We nevertheless retain the statement as it is made in the text. Examples of princes who had behaved themselves differently from the reckless, feckless Qin, the monarch in a fit of irritation, in order to destroy the remembrance of these ancient sovereigns, who were quoted continually by the learned as a reproach to his pomp, resolved to burn all the books and, as the reins of government were entirely in his hands, he decided to reward himself, and abolished the title of king, and used emperor instead, and as his disregard and contempt of the past increased, he proclaimed himself Shi Huangti, one or Qin, the only first." When the antiquity-loving scholars protested against his wanton unconcern for the precious past, the only first deliberately treated them with scant courtesy. He unceremoniously buried about 500 of them alive, and carried out his riotous resolve to eliminate the cautious classics, the useful books which treated of fortune-telling, astrology, agriculture, and medicine were spared. If anybody was found whispering or insinuating that his Edition de Luxe was uncanonical, the unlucky individual was promptly decapitated. Not only were the blind followers of ancient usage beheaded, but their faithful families were exterminated like pestiferous rats, and the officials of the districts were held responsible for not stamping out all vestiges of the pesky, moldy, rusty, dusty past. So many scholars were buried that melons grew in winter on the spot. The way he hit on this appellation is instructive, considering that he had united in himself the virtues of the Sanhuang, or three primordial sovereigns, BC 2852-2596, and the Wu-Ti 5 emperors that followed. He joined their titles into the one of Huangti. 22 The Great Wall of China, above bodies. History thought the only first, shall begin with me. His country was divided into 36 prefectures, and the people were called black heads, because they wore dark caps. But people in those good old days were superstitious, and it is no small wonder that the emperor himself began to observe portents. Qin saw, or imagined he saw, a foreigner 60 feet high with feet 2 yards long. So it occurred to the sovereign to gather all his weapons of war that had been used to conquer his enemies, and cast them into 12 mighty images which would rival this giant of his active imagination in bigness. Probably they did, if we can believe the history which states that each image weighed 60 tons. They were put in his pet palace, and afterwards destroyed in the wars that followed the death of their maker. Qin needed no expositions to set business agog. At his order 1,200 wealthy families moved into Henan, his capital. The demand for luxuries and necessaries having been created, it followed, as the night the day, that supply would be forthcoming. To these superstitious and commercial notions, Qin added the lust of luxury. His life was not shrouded in dim magnificence. He built a wonderful palace which has been variously described. The following facts are taken fresh from the imperial history. This palace was magnificent, and certain gorgeous annexes were attached at intervals, the whole now extending 200 miles. In these he corralled all the handsome women that could. Some authorities suggest that the Chinese have long been accustomed to style themselves the black-headed race from the color of their hair. 23. If you want to see everyone like yourself, you must look in your glass. Be found in his domains, and the annexes were so numerous that it required 36 years for him to be at home in them all, at the rate of 1 annex per diem. Flying carts of Qin's day. 1 shoulder, 3 eyes, make carts, and fly long distances in the air. Very dangerous people. Stated mathematically, the number would be 13,140, far in advance of Solomon, third king of Israel, whose heart was turned by his numerous wives. In consequence of his luxury, the emperor grew more superstitious and suspicious. Being told there was an island of the sea, in which certain genii made their abode, he fitted out an expedition to discover, if possible, this enchanted ground. Several hundred men and women were dispatched on the voyage of discovery, and were never heard from again. The annals of Japan tell how they arrived safely and settled down in their new home. But his superstitions and suspicions were probably the occasion for beginning the work of the Great Wall. For having been informed of a prophecy which foretold his destruction by the Huns, Qin mobilized an army of 300,000 men to work and fight if necessary on this great structure. It was at this time that the Chinese pen, or brush, which afterwards proved so powerful, was invented by a soldier. In this period of antiquity, the principles of capillary attraction were not understood, but a knowledge of practical physics was necessary. The astute Chinese discovered that if the hair of the goat which formed the brush of the pen was soaked in lime water, the ink would run, and the pen would be rendered serviceable. Presage of the fountain pen. Once put an ovum of idea into the hatchery of the human brain, and something will come of it in the end, even if it be only a fountain pen, and even if it takes 2,000 years. Then Qin conceived another idea, and to carry it out employed 700,000 workmen. This idea was to erect a large hall that would seat 10,000 people, a very extensive building for that age, forerunner of the modern auditorium. But suspicion, that bane of the usurper, stirred him up again. He was warned against spending. 25. When two tigers fight, one must come to grief. 2 successive nights in one place, so he lay low as to where he slept o' nights. Capital punishment was meted out to the informer who divulged this mighty secret. Under such abnormal conditions of life, the monarch became vindictive. No one was spared for remonstrating against his action in state affairs. His eldest son was banished and died in exile. History states that an aerolite fell about this time, on which this legend was inscribed: on the death of Qin the country will be divided. The emperor suspected a trick, tried hard to find out the author of the legend, and failing this, he decapitated every individual in the district in which the fateful stone had fallen, and reduced the aerolite itself to ashes. Qin the only first then canonized the Tiaishan, or Sacred Mountain of China as it is now known. Today his image is found in one of the temples of this famous Mecca, and a plain shaft of granite 15 feet high, 3 feet wide and 2 feet thick, called the Letterless Mountain, is said to have been erected by this same prince who buried the scholars and burned the books. But far more important than the superstitious dedication of a mountain was the introduction of the seal, shadow of the Great Seal of England, and all other seals since. The original was a curious representation of birds and fish, combined and translated into the Chinese of today. These symbols are Xiaoming Hua Udirasis Tian Qi Xiaoyang Chang. They mean in English, I have received the decree from heaven, and have already enjoyed the age of everlasting prosperity. 26. The Great Wall of China. The seal of Qin Shi Huang Ti, which was the first seal of China. The ancient characters mean, I have received the decree from heaven, and have already enjoyed the age of everlasting prosperity. List of drawings. The number and variety of his wars, reforms, diversions and luxuries, however, wore the emperor out. One can imagine that he became considerably blasé before the 37 years of his reign were finished. In the words of Sir Walter Scott, the stage darkened before the curtain fell. During one of his excursions abroad throughout his dominion, whilst in the present province of Shantung, the emperor sickened and died. His ministers, the workman who would do good work, must first sharpen his tools, and attendants were alarmed, for so powerful was his personality and so potent his influence that the state was literally upheld by the man. News of his death coming before matters could be arranged at the capital some 100 miles away would prove fatal to the monarchy. What was to be done? There were no means at hand for embalming the body, even if the knowledge of this art was known. They were many days' journey from the metropolis, and the dreadful secret of the emperor's death must be kept. But they set out bravely for home. Ere long the presence of the dead Qin became manifest through the olfactories. Doubts were expressed by the people who witnessed the imperial procession, when the prince appeared only in absentia. To remove these suspicions, the wily ministers bought a large quantity of fish overripe for consumption in these more finicky days. And while the smell was doubled, all doubts and fears on the part of the anxious public were dissipated and allayed. Thus the insanitary, fishy cortege moved along to the capital, diffusing the mixed unfragrant odor of insanctity, but dispelling the dangerous doubts of the people. But even fish cannot keep a secret, and the truth came out at last. But not until arrangements were perfected for Qin II. The oldest son, who was assisting in the erection of the Great Wall, had committed suicide on receipt of a lying letter purported to have been written by his father, and ordering him to dispose of himself. Obedient son. And so it fell out that the next dutiful offspring ascended the throne as Qin II, or Qinni or Shi. This promising 28. The Great Wall of China. Youth began his imperial life by decapitating all his brothers and sisters. There were only 12 brothers and 10 sisters. But these 22 persons whose only guilt was the fact of being, were ruthlessly butchered along with all their numerous connections, by this bloodthirsty villain. His name would not be mentioned in this book at all were it not for several acts of his short reign, which had reference to the only first. In the first place he completed the palace of the late emperor. Then he built a splendid mausoleum for his deceased father, more from fear and superstition, we trow, than from any feeling of respect or veneration. Old Chinese tombs are supposed to consist of hollowed-out hills. The history states that Qin II prepared a tomb in a mountain, and furnished it with kinds of precious and valuable things, that he made a lake of quicksilver with 2 quicksilver rivers, flowing into it which would always appear pure and clear one, and that in this excavation he immured thousands of the wives and concubines of the dead emperor. He shut the door in the face of these wretched women, and they starved to death in the tomb. On the principle that dead men tell no tales, he secretly devised an instrument, some infernal machine, that struck down and killed every workman engaged in constructing this veritable charnel house. Those were the brave days of old. The dynasty of Qin the only first set up in so much blood, and maintained with such cruelty, did not long survive the death of its founder. The word translated quicksilver is rather obscure, and other scholars suggest that the true meaning was water limpid as silver. Be that as it may, the modern legends have adopted the more uncanny version. The Great Wall of China photo by Dr. Gueullette. The Great Wall climbing the mountains of Chile. List of illustrations.
哀莫大于心死29。
No grief so great as for a dead heart. Qin II was unable to hold the half-civilized chieftains together, and after 7 years the empire fell into the hands of a soldier of fortune, who founded the famous dynasty of Han. And here let me close this part of China's history merely remarking that the Chinese nowadays call themselves the sons of Han, and not the sons of Qin. Ever since the death of the only first the Chinese scholars have despised his memory. This was because of his burning and killing characteristics. But in fact this emperor, although cruel and remorseless, has left his mark on these people. We cannot describe the Celestials in any language, except their own, without using the name of Qin. His name since he lived has always been, and probably always will be, on the lips of all Western nations. Even Japan has invented a designation for China which savors of the great first. Japanese postage stamps, now used especially for letters to and from China, bear the magic word Si Chna on the plain, wordless tablet on mount. Tai may indicate to the Shantung peasant the contempt of Qin Shi Huang for letters, but in burning the antiquated records of the past he also burned his name ineradicably distinct on the records of history. And we cannot write China without first writing Qin. The prefectures of China still remain, not the same geographically, but in principle. This shows by long experience that even his enemies thought Qin not so. 1 or China. 30 The Great Wall of China. Far wrong in the division of the country for convenient administration. For many, many years China has been pining for another Qin. The want has not been openly expressed and probably not even recognized. But the fact remains, China has been, and is still sick for more Shi Huang tea. First, the libraries and brains of the literati are stuffed full of useless, literary rubbish and lumber and fit only to make a bonfire of. The stuff is so dry that it would burn like tinder. Qin would bejuice them and to light this heap. We would not approve of his burying the scholars alive, head and all, but simply up to their necks, when they could be unearthed on the solemn promise to learn something real, modern, and to teach that in the madrasa for the beautiful and elegant, China has not swept the field. On the whole, we believe that, eliminating his cruelty and bloodthirstiness, another Qin might be the man and brain to start China fresh once more.
Alright guys, so that's as far as I'm going to have it read. If you guys want to see the whole book, I'll leave the link in the description. You guys can also, if you have an iPhone, you can enable Siri to read it for you. So this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. Okay, so we'll have Siri read through here. Whoopsie. Okay, we'll have Siri read through here.
After a journey of 1,000 li or 300 miles along the wall, or on the wall, a temple of hideous idols on the horizontal ridge 4,000 feet above the sea gave an opportunity to sit and muse on the section explored, and to meditate how many moons must elapse before the journey should end at the western limit of the Great Barrier. A mere student of the map might wonder why the Russians did not utilize this ready-made permanent way to lay their steel rails upon, and so rejuvenate the wall as the main railroad to the Pacific. But a little experience of the eastern section shows that the levels were adapted for defense across, not for travel along. No, The wall is not for modern use, it is an ancient fossil, the largest fossil on the planet. But fossils are. 34. The Great Wall of China. Useful and truthful. It is the dividing line between two civilizations, and between two eras. In space it cut off the herdsmen of the north from the tillers of the south, the predatory Abels of the desert from the peaceful Cains of the rivers. This reminds us that we only know the story from the Cain side, where the Chinese pose as innocent and needing defense. It would be interesting to hear what the Abels thought of it. How the Mongols regarded the White Wall, as they called it, a barrier to cut them off from the water for their flocks. And if they complained, a barrier whence would issue an army to cut them down and slander them afterward. The wolf first quarrels with the lamb, then eats him, then tells the world that the lamb was attacking him. The wall divided the wolves from the lambs, but which was on which side is a question.
How you like that, guys? So, the herdsmen from the north, the Abels of the desert, evil Abels, and the good Cains, I had someone tell me one time, the conquerors write the history. And he couldn't be more true. We have the Cains writing the history here, guys, and saying that the Abels are evil, And even these guys, before the study of Tartaria and stuff like that, they're going, there's something not right here, you know what I mean? And they're calling Cain or Abels a wicked, wicked Abels. The Cains are calling them. But yeah, how the Mongols regarded it as the White Wall, as they called it, a barrier to cut them off from the water for their flocks. And they complained. The barrier whence would issue an army to cut them down and slaughter them afterwards. So yeah, pretty interesting. But yeah, definitely different.
The fierce Mongols between this heavy line and the frozen north, elate with unerring bow, would gladly. Mongols hunting in the desert north of the Great Wall. List of drawings. Precipitate themselves on the plodding peasants of the Southland. It seems to us that the wall was designed to preserve peace, and as such, still stands the most pronounced effort of ancient or modern times. Which will be the more potent promoter of peace, Temple at the Hague, or the Wall of Qin? The builder, even 2,000 years ago, was ahead of the senseless militarism of Europe. Warful nations have disappeared, but the peaceful Chinese continue through millenniums. The warlike spirit boomerangs and destroys its author. Peace pays. 50. The Great Wall of China. It was then, and is now, madness to trust individuals or nations, or the chance of blind impious luck, to avoid by peaceful means a dreadful fate to friend or foe, to make harmless the noisy and heedless passions of wild and wicked men, to impede rage, prevent horror, perfume wrath with hesitation, is fit achievement for gods and women. These chaste and admirable virtues are here found written stone, mostly in granite stone. A part then of this great wall is immortal. It can now boast a lengthy youth, and an old age just begun. It has prevented many a dreadful harvest of the sword, slaughter cumbrous and fresh. It has prevented many a shameful tribute to the unfathomed hatred of barbarian hordes. Great Wall, all hail. It remains true that it is better to lay stones than to throw them. A wall to protect the living is better than a ditch to cover the dead. Let immortal honors cluster, and bestow themselves to praise the virtue that conceived and constructed the greatest wall in the world, which has for ages stood for peace, and which has for ages diffused delay. Great Wall, all hail.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they say, the Chinese built the wall, this and that. But, there's a lot of evidence that also shows the opposite is true. And it was interesting because, the Mongols and the Tartars nowadays, if you look in the history and Google search it and stuff, they're like the same people. They're like, they're the same people. They're horse riding barbarians and this and that. And then it's like, well, horse riding barbarians also have 80,000 rhinoceroses. It's kind of just interesting stuff, Also, the masonry work. And they were like, to be able to, like I said up here earlier, it was like to be able to transport that kind of materials and lay it and to assemble such an amazing structure, it's beyond comprehension. Yes, of course it's beyond comprehension, because obviously it didn't happen the way they said it happened. the Chinese built it off of, built the wall off of, the ruins of something, much, the ruins of another wall, or, or the towers or whatnot, what have you. But yeah, and then laid it in 12 years. 1,200 miles in 12 years. Yeah.
Marvelous is this stupendous work of man. To read of it trailing its bulk along the edge of an empire is to court incredulity. To behold it climbing the sides of ravines, cresting the watersheds of ranges, striding across ravines, is to conceive a mighty admiration for its architect. To traverse it day after day for months is to grasp at the strenuous activity of the builders. To hear that every third able-bodied man of the empire was pressed into service to pile the massy stones, is to gain some idea of the limitless power of its designer. To listen to the legends of the remorseless speed of its construction, so that tardy workmen were immured in the sections they lingered over, is to realize the hatred inspired and handed on for generations. What danger threatened? Or was it but the spirit of that age like ours millenniums later? Did this vast construction rise phoenix-like from the relics of a former barrier? Or did it spring like Minerva full-orbed from the brain of one man? Was it the magnifying of similar indigenous monuments, a mere developing of Chinese ideas? Or was it inspired by foreign ideals, by tales of barbarian doings in the Western world, by a determination to show that when the Son of Heaven condescended to look upon the works of the foreign devils, he could by one exertion of his 51.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, guys. Yeah, so did the vast construction rise phoenix-like from the relics of a former barrier? Question mark. See, that's my point right there. They're saying the same thing, the speed that it was created, the amount of resource, the energy and such. And then this cruel emperor would just throw their bodies into the wall, when they drop dead and this and that. He's so cruel, we hate him, down with chin or whatever. Well, there's that, or let's put it in the other perspective. Another party is building the wall. Let's say the Tartarians were building the wall, and the Chinese keep attacking them. Well, after they slaughter the Chinese that are raiding them for building the wall, they take the bodies and they throw them into the wall. If you're not going to be if you're going to be a part of the problem, then you'll become a part of the solution. You're going to get thrown into the wall. Well, that's another, that's another thought process, because, there's giving things to the God of heaven and this and that, and does that mean, the Chinese were, had Christian beliefs? I mean, they say that the old roots of China were, which goes back to that Tartaria stuff anyway, the Tartarian influence on the Chinese, because they were part of the nation, the Treaty of Nations. And if you read Tales for Tartaria from 1812, I'll leave a link to that too. You can see that they were all at peace with one another. Okay, so to finish this video, we're going to go through all the Tartaria stuff in this document. You could read the entire book if you wish. There's a lot of secrets in here. They did a real in-depth study back in the day, and you can see that they were more open to than the brainwashing that we're getting in history and stuff like that. This is the way it is, and says the conquerors, right? We wrote the history because we conquered everybody. So yeah, so when the bad king conquers the good king, the bad king writes in history that the good king was bad. So, start off, okay. The king of Tartary sat down with Peking with 1,200,000 foot, 600,000 horses, and 17,000 ships, and 80,000 rhinoceroses that carried the baggage for the army. Woo! One heck of an army, dude. That sounds like something from Lord of the Rings or something, 80,000 rhinoceroses marched into Mordor, So, yeah, there's that. I guess the word start, right? The Tartars to the north. We read about that. All right. The inner line of defense, eastern wide, joining the other 100 miles to the west before All right, this is page... Okay, so the Tartars are also on page 69 again. Yeah, see? Right there. The 13 tombs of the Ming Dynasty and the Great Line that refortified the walls and held it long against the Tartars. Page 83. Two mountain ranges unite and enclosed a camp of an ancient Qin Tartars. Wait, the Qin Tartars, huh? The Golden Horde. Oh, okay, so this is like the Genghis Khan guys, I guess? So Qin Tartars. Remember, Qin was that emperor in China. So now, it just reminds me of the whole Cain and Abel thing that he was saying earlier. Qin Tartars, I mean, is that just a typo, or is that what they're calling them now? And you can see that there's a little bit of a cover-up, because Qin is China. So, here's a pretty interesting part. Check this out, guys. Could this be the ghost of a Tartarian warrior?
Curiously enough, there was a disturbance at midnight in the grounds of the very inn where we were stopping. We were awakened out of a sound slumber by screams and shrieks that were terrifying in the extreme. At first it seemed that we must be dreaming, but the uproar grew louder and more awe-inspiring, until at length our thoughts ran to automatic rifles. Seizing one, we hastened into the cold, dark night, fearing that the danger was to our companions, who were sleeping on the far side of the courtyard, and in the direction of the noise. The yelling and screaming were unearthly, fit for the lower regions. In the dim light we noticed that the great gate of the court was closed and locked. The crowd inside rushed about and were greatly excited. Rifle in hand, we joined the nervous, trembling group, and listened to the strange tale being told by one of the most excited of the natives. Several men, it seems, were sleeping on the Kong, with their heads on the outer edge after the Chinese custom, when something awakened one of them. He held his breath for fear, as he watched a tall, uncanny creature steal in through the door. This unearthly thing wore no queue. Its hair hung down over the forehead, stripes of bright yellow showed on the cheeks, and over it was a long blue gown lined with gray. The troubled imagination of the native pictured the visitor as of giant size, with long gaunt fingers and extended nails. It seems to have taken the corner of his cloak, which evidently was leaded, and struck one after another. 377. Alms done openly will be repaid secretly. Of the sleepers a heavy blow. It appeared to have a particular enmity for the man farthest in, who was sleeping next the wall. Repeated blows fell upon the head of this hapless man, who, not knowing what he said, shouted, strike me," which was precisely what he did not want done. The fiend took him at his word, and hit him again, until the wounded man, not knowing whether he was addressing a god or devil, shouted, I would have done no evil. Why does the devil come and beat me thus? Quotation mark. And so the story ran, told at the height of midnight, on the edge of the gloomy, silent desert at the end of the Great Wall, with the mountains of mysterious Tibet looking down upon the scene. It was all weird and uncanny. We slept the remainder of the night with a repeating cordite rifle, automatic and deadly, at our side. The next morning 2 of the men had their heads in bandages, and they rehearsed with embellishments the story of the devil's attack in the dead of night. Whatever interpretation is placed on this incident, it suggests that the consciences of men, because of superstitious dread, become active at the Marshall Pass. Next day, when we made the acquaintance of one of the guards at the gate named Old Hero Meng after the greatest of Chinese philosophers, he corroborated my ideas about the abundance of superstitions in the neighborhood of the pass. Speaking about the midnight excitement, he said, oh yes, it was the devil. No man would make a noise like that. It was the devil. Because 4 men saw the devil. And anyhow, 378 The Great Wall of China. Every man meets the devil at least once in 10 days, either big or little voice.
Every man meets the devil at least once in 10 days. So yeah, the yellow cheeks. Just think about that, guys. Yellow for the flag of Tartary. Tartaria, Greater Tartary. What do you think, guys? Here we kind of find an inconsistency. Check it out.
Look at the Grand Canal of the Chinese, built by the Tartars and constructed on the 2 fundamental principles of political economy, the easy production of wealth, and its easy distribution. Here we find both ends attained by the same construction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Built by the Tartars. Here we find both ends attained by the same construction. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They go on to say, well, it was, made of wood, and it was made too shallow, and it was, running really fast. And then the Chinese rebuilt it, and then they had to rebuild it again. And long story short, they were able to do it in 54 days. And they were celebrating, the emperor was really proud of them and stuff. But anyway, yeah, interesting, huh? I find it interesting. The author relates here. They said, this one-time capital of the province contains fact or fiction to fit the fancy of historian and novelist. West is the Ala Shan range, and beyond are the wide waste of Tartary. Okay, where the Gobi stretches out its embalming sands over cities once alive with human activity in the days when patient irrigation kept droughts at bay. It is not curious to reflect that the countries which have harbored most of the ancient civilizations are regions of deficient rainfall and compulsory irrigation. When it's Egypt, Persia, Arabia, and China, all contagious to deserts. So yeah, they have there are these big deserts and stuff, but it was just interesting. Tartary is part of those great empires that they don't really mention, isn't it? And then like the double pig head at each end of the body brings famine, needs a wall to keep them out. It's just interesting, and then so we got this story coming up about Genghis Khan. And it's really interesting. All right, check this out.
There are signs in the brickwork that the towers were designed and finished first before any wall was erected. The order is not wall, and then towers on it, but towers, and then a curtain between them.
Yeah, it goes back to, where the tower's already there and then they just built the curtains, where it says that they'd built it in like 12 years. It's like, I don't know about that. But, whatever, right? All the thing is, it doesn't line up. But, on the Tartarian maps, the wall is there. So whoever built the wall is irrelevant. All I know is the Chinese were working with the East India Trade Company and the Rothschilds and the Khazars for taking down Tartaria. And that's really interesting. So in the next video, we're going to talk about look at the history of Gog and Magog in the Bible, and how it could be a secret, it could be a key. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, okay, so body of a horse, wings of a bird, tiger stripes, lives in north wilderness, full of wrongs for man. They've got a lot of images of monsters and stuff. I noticed, headless horror, color of fire, 6 feet, 4 wings, confused mass without eyes or face, like a yellow bag, not having eyes, can only see itself. And they'd be, this might be just analogies for something or whatnot, or some kind of lessons. But then again, you look at the Tartaria map, you got monsters on there too, guys, mutants and stuff. And then the old depiction, here's the man who made the Great Wall of China, now, after the controllers drew you. And remember, guys, don't forget, even after you read this, they've made a very convincing argument. They really have. And they've brainwashed the entire generations and stuff. And this is your history, you know what I mean? Orphans. But yeah, very convincing. Look at this one, guys. Little touch here. Flying carts of Chin's day. 1 shoulder, 3 eyes. It says, make carts and fly long distances in the air. Very dangerous people. Wait, very dangerous people. I thought you were talking about your guys. But yeah, flying machines, guys. I mean, and then this is their writing. Are you sure, China? Is that your writing? The Seal of Qin. Oh yeah, that's right. Qin gets taken over by the Hans, or the Seal of Qin. That's right, they get taken over by the Hans, which was the first seal of China. The ancient characters mean, I have received the decree from the heavens and have already enjoyed the age of everlasting prosperity. You know, it's just interesting, though, you know. It's made 200 years before Christ, so it's 200 BC. It's just odd. You know, they say they have gunpowder cannons on top of the walls, and catapults that can shoot 300-pound blocks and stuff. I mean, maybe, but you know. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and guys, our dates can be off too. That's the thing, is our dates can be off. But I mean, they got a really convincing argument, you know, about how the Tartarians were just a bunch of barbarians. You know, they're just barbarians. But there's other information out there that shows that they weren't barbarians. And like Tales from Tartaria, it sounds like they were really elegant people, very elegant people. And this is just controlled by the controllers, because they didn't want you to know what dastardly deed they did to them. And they covered it up even as far as the Bible. So make sure that you guys keep watching Quest for Tartaria, and like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you know when the next video is. And we're going to cover Gog and Magog, and it's not what you think. And yeah, we're going to show some proof that the controllers may have messed with the 1800s Bible as well. All right, guys, take care.